Go.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion. My name is William von Einem, and I will be the moderator for this event tonight. Our discussion today, which takes place in cooperation with the Danube Strategy Point, is inspired by the IDM study, How Would Young People Strengthen Europe's Regions? The study was supported by the European Union through the UR-EU project. It explores what young people see as the biggest challenges facing Europe's regions and how they believe these issues should be tackled. We will look at how young generations perceive regional challenges, how diverse interests can come together, and how EU strategies, like the EU strategy for the Danube region, can empower young people. As of the structure, we will begin with a few welcoming words from Dr. Robert Lichtner, whom I will hand over to in just a second. This will be followed by a presentation of the IDM study, How Would Young People Strengthen Europe's Regions, by my co-worker and research associate, Malwina Talik. And then we will move into our panel discussion. Yes, this will be added by, or we will then move into a Q&A with the audience. As of the Q&A, for the audience, if you have any questions, please just write them in the Zoom chat and address it to a specific panelist so I can direct it properly during the Q&A towards the panelist. Yes, so to officially open today's session, I'm very pleased to hand over to Dr. Robert Lichtner. He's the head of the Danube Strategy Point. Robert, thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, William, and thank you for doing this event together. A very good afternoon, or rather, looking out of my window, rather good evening already, looking at the color of the weather out there. Thank you for doing this event together, the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe, together with the DSP, the Danube Strategy Point, which is the secretariat of the Danube Region Strategy. And William, thank you for this excellent introduction, because you made a really valid point. We will be discussing today about how young people can come together, can discuss youth policies, can discuss the future of Europe at the end of the day, and how can young people get more engaged in macro-regional strategies, but also in European and regional policies. You have said and you have heard that the question was put, how would young people strengthen Europe's regions? The study was carried out by the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe, and was also closely done together with the Danube Region Strategy. It was funded by the European Commission. So here we also see the engagement of the European Commission when it comes really to look at the engagement of young people into policies. When we look at Europe and when we look across Europe, we see that young people are extremely eager to shape this future, their own future, but also the future of all of us. Looking at democratic values, looking at resilience of Europe, looking at changing Europe as such. And one thing that we see is that young people do not want to just be passive observers. They're already contributing in many cases, in many ways. And the question now is, how can we drive this even more forward? Is it activism? Is it innovation? Is it cross-border cooperation, cohesion policy? And the most pressing question is, how can we do it on the ground? So how can young people actually contribute to our joint future? When we look at macro-regional strategies and the European macro regions, we see that we have a bunch of common priorities here. If we look at education, mobility, sustainability, here the young generation is looking to have a real voice when it comes to decisions that are at the end of the day affecting their life. We see a lot of optimism coming from young people, but then again, having this question, how can young people be more and more engaged in macro-regional policies, in macro-regional cooperation, but also overall in the European cooperation. So this is something that we'll be discussing today, and I'm really looking forward to your inputs and also to the questions from whoever is following us online, and handing over back to you, William.
Well, thank you very much, Robert, for your welcoming words and for setting the stage for today's discussion. Before we can start with the discussion, I'm delighted to hand over to Malwina Talik, Research Associate here at the IDM. Malwina, what can you tell us about the IDM study?
Thank you very much, William. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I hope that you can see my presentation. Perfect. So yeah, I'm happy to give you a very brief overview of this final report from the project URU, which was already mentioned by you previously. URU itself was conducted by the IDM between September 2024 and May 2025. As it has already been mentioned, it was financed by the European Regional Development Fund. Its main aim was to consult youth on regional challenges, but also ask youth and young people for their solutions. Another aim was to increase familiarity with the EU macro-regional strategies and also with the EU funding opportunities. And as part of this project, we also carry out an online questionnaire, which then served as a source for this final report on how would young people strengthen Europe's region. The report should be seen rather as a teaser, as a small-scale preliminary study that could serve as for further deliberations, because as you can see, we had 91 respondents, which is a rather small group, aged between 18 and 35 years. But nevertheless, even if the group was small, we believe that there are many trends that have been identified that can be very useful, again, for further studies and definitely for the discussion tonight. A bit more about our respondents. So 54% of them were women, 46 were men, and most of them came from the Danube macro region strategy. Among the challenges that they have highlighted, a clear front runner was employment and income insecurity. And this was then followed by housing crisis and high cost of living, education and skill mismatch, and political disillusionment, as well as lack of youth representation. Those were challenges within the regions. When it comes to challenges identified in the cross-border, cross-regional cooperation, the most often mentioned areas were education, youth cooperation, employment, transport, and green transition. When it comes to who the respondents saw as most suited actor to handle the especially cross-regional and cross-border challenges, this was the EU, followed by regional and national authorities. What surprised us a little bit was how visible Interact projects are. So the visibility was only partial, around 46%. And a relatively low familiarity with the EU macro-regional strategies, also among people who live in those macro regions. Now we come to recommendations that our respondents made. I picked just a couple of them. So as housing crisis was the most dire issue, the most dire challenge, also most recommendations were made for this particular problem. And some solutions included regulations against speculative manipulation of flat prices, expanding government-backed housing programs, or financial assistance for first-time homebuyers. Another recommendation was related to the job market and employment opportunities. So, for example, introducing transparency in recruitment process, because nepotism and favorism was also seen as one of sub-challenges within employment. Another recommendation included supporting business growth and innovation, but not only in urban centers, but very much at the local level. So young people, young adults don't have to leave their regions. Another recommendation here includes like expanding internships, high quality internships with fair compensation, so no unpaid internships, to put it differently, and for example banning exploitative so-called freelance contracts. Further investment in regional infrastructure and connectivity was very much wished for. This is related both to education and increasing employment opportunities, because then it allows for commuting between either different regions or also rural areas and urban centers. Further enhancement in education to meet labor market demands, because one of the challenges or sub-challenges identified was a certain mismatch and lack of the investment in soft skills and digital skills among pupils and students. So because of that, the education system was seen as not keeping pace with the demands of the market. So enhancing those skills would be very much wished for. And last but not least, including young people and youth perspective in policymaking at all levels. That was also one of the most pronounced recommendations. I will stop here. Again, this was rather a teaser, which I hope will be very useful for this discussion. If you want to learn more about the further recommendations and more detailed information about our findings, you will find this report either on the IDM website, or I will also paste a link to in a chat in a second. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Malwina. Those were really interesting insights. I think that your presentation gives us a lot to think about and hopefully even more to discuss about. It's great to have these research-backed recommendations. I think it's really interesting, how you patterned them together. Let's now dive deeper into these themes in our panel discussion. I want to introduce our panelists prior to starting with the panel discussion. First, whom you have already met or heard, Dr. Robert Lichtner, head of Danube Strategy Point, the Secretariat of the EU Strategy for the Danube region, EUSDR, and also IDM board member. Then we have Dr. Elena Abramovska. She's a senior researcher for democracy, society, and youth at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, focusing on youth participation and democratic engagement. And Caroline Lercher Tauber, representative of the Danube Youth Council, bringing in the voice and perspectives of young people. I thank you all for being here and engaging with us in this discussion. Yes, I would like to open this round of questions, the panel discussion, with a question to all of you, to all of the panelists, with the request for a short answer. Were you surprised by the findings of the IDM study, and which results resonate most with your own experience and insights from your insights into youth participation in the EU? Yes, I would suggest that whoever wants to go first goes first, or I will call someone.
I can start. So thank you so much for the introductory words, and thank you, Malwina, for the very interesting presentation. It really sets the scene for our discussion today, and I'm happy to be here and discuss young people and their views on society and politics and political participation. So I found the study quite interesting. I think it's a very good exploratory study that can really kind of spark a debate for further research on how to empower young people in the region. And in terms of what is surprising, I found it actually quite surprising that it really echoes and resonates the studies we have done here, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. Although recently we worked on a little bit different regions. So recently we worked more on Southeast Europe, and you have some countries overlap, and you also have some other countries. It's really striking that socioeconomic concerns dominate our research, dominate your research. And this is a little bit of a worrying trend, but I was surprised because, often, so when we talk about, let's say, Southeast Europe, there is a little bit of a less surprise that this is the case. It's more in a way thought, okay, it's been the case also for the last few years. But now we see in other countries in Europe, also in Western Europe, the socioeconomic concerns sometimes trump, let's say, concerns about the climate and the environment. So it really shows how necessary and how important it is to focus on these issues if we want to mobilize young people to participate in the democratic processes at large.
I can follow up on what Elena has said. I could very much resonate also with the study. I read it with a lot of interest, and it really resonated with me. Thank you for the invitation for today and evening, and I'm really happy to be here as a representative of the Danube Youth Council. Also because the Danube Youth Council very recently did a position paper on the EU youth strategy and the interim report, and we, on a very lot of the key findings that you published, we agree, or we really reflect a similar opinion. So I really think this is a great opportunity to connect those findings, to connect those papers, and to really join the forces in tackling those issues and bringing them up, raising awareness and building more advocacy for them. Thank you.
Okay, I will be the last in this round. Not so many surprises, rather maybe some confirmations that I have seen in that study, and also thanks to Malvina for conducting this really good study that we can also use in the Danube strategy, but not only there, we can also use it in other macro-regional strategies. As you know, there is 4 macro-regional strategies across Europe, so we have a quite large geographical areas that is covered by macro-regional strategies and macro-regional cooperation here. And when we established the Danube Youth Council, where Carolina is also part of the Youth Council back in 2022, we had the first discussions. And we also looked at, we basically asked the young people that have become members of the Danube Youth Council what kind of topics they would like to work with. And we basically aligned our approach with the focus fields, with the topics that the Danube region strategy is implementing. So at the end of the day, we have created the opportunity for young people really to work on these big transnational topics that the whole region is dealing with. And when Elena, you mentioned the socioeconomic, let's say, concerns that we have, I'm 100% with you when you said that this is not just something that concerns more Central Europe or Southeastern Europe. This is something that young generation is concerned all over the place, not only across the whole Danube region, but we can see very similar trends also in other macro-regional strategies. Say the other macro-regional strategies also have youth participation, youth councils, where also young generation is able to work on policies and on transnational issues that the strategies are basically tackling. So looking at topics like education, looking at skills, employment, businesses, infrastructure. So this is something that we are dealing with in the Danube strategy. And the unique thing that I think we have created, and Carolina knows this very much, is that while we have on the expert on the policy and political level, the proposals, solutions that we are seeking together, 14 countries in the Danube region, all the way from Germany to the Black Sea. It's not only the senior experts, not only the political and policy level, but since 3 years ago, we have the young generation, the Danube Youth Council, really working together with these experts. So I think when we look at the outcomes of the study, this pretty much matches what we are actually doing in the Danube region strategy. So I think we have a perfect match, some 90%. What we are not covering, and this was maybe a little bit of a surprise, is the housing topic. This is something that, for example, the Danube strategy is not covering. So this could be something to look at a little more, maybe in the future, how this topic could maybe be also tackled in the future.
Thank you very much. I think this creates the perfect scene for my following questions. Carolina, I want to ask you, many young people, as we just heard, across the Danube region face challenges like high housing costs, precarious jobs, and limited access to opportunities. Based on your experience in the Danube Youth Council, how do you see these challenges affecting young people's everyday choices and sense of belonging? For example, feeling connected to their town, their region, or the wider European community?
From my experience or from the exchanges having with other young people in the Danube Youth Councils and in general in the region, those are challenges which affect a wide range of young people, but mostly affected also by discrimination, which live in poverty or don't even have the family support structures in order to have those boosts in following an educational path or having this transition from education to employment. So if you don't have the support system behind you, it's really difficult for them to be involved in any sense. So there's no support system either in, having this sense of belonging or being in kind of a educational system where you can find your path or your perspectives or develop them together with other peers. So this is something that I think we should really focus on in how we can support people affected by poverty, people affected of having no family support structures behind them or facing discrimination in many ways, especially in the Danube region or also in other macro regions. This is a huge issue that we have to put more awareness on. And before we don't do that, I think there's not a lot of space to talk about the sense of belonging and how to really improve those main findings that we have already looked at before.
Thank you very much. I want to add on that and ask you a follow-up question. What do you think would make young people feel that policymakers understand these realities? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Of course, I think we have to make meaningful participation for marginalized youth, so integrate them really from the basis, from their communities where they come from, and build youth initiatives where they can really connect to grassroots initiatives, and then strengthen them from a bottom-up approach, in my opinion, and really make it accessible, user-inclusive language, make it also accessible for people with disabilities, because also they are often not really seen in such contexts. I think that, for example, the EU Youth Dialogue is a first step towards this direction, as they try to really include smaller youth councils and national youth councils and try to have as many perspectives in there as possible. However, it's quite a new concept, and I think we have to look at it in a few years to see whether it really works. But I think trying to connect better the grassroots initiatives with the policy level, this would make a real difference.
Thank you. I think that's a really interesting thought. Just in general, for all panelists, if you ever want to add anything or want to comment anything, feel free to do so. In case nobody wants to do that now, I would move on with my next question. I wanted to ask you, Elena, so you co-authored a study in 2025 that I was able to read and look into, called Southeast Europe, the 6 Phases of Youth, in which you suggest that disengagement among young people often result from structural barriers. And we've also talked about socioeconomic concerns as barriers. From your research, how does inequality in access to housing, education, or labor market opportunities translate into disengagement or engagement when it comes to the youth in the Danube region?
Yeah, so in our research and this study, the one that you're mentioning, is sort of an adjunct study to another one. This is more focused on kind of different clusters of young people. And in both of those studies, because they're based on the same sample, we see that structural inequalities and socioeconomic problems really color every facet of our data. So whenever I try to analyze different things, we realize that socioeconomic inequalities really play an important role. And when it comes specifically to political participation, this is also the case. So let's, for example, talk about voting. And, you know, young people in the region in Southeast Europe are still quite disengaged from politics, and yet voting is the most primary way to engage in politics. So most of them still, like, when they could choose one form of engagement, it would be voting. But even there is the significant proportion of those who abstained from voting in, let's say, the last elections were respondents with low socioeconomic levels and background, unemployed, or those that worked outside of their profession. So we really see how socioeconomic realities of young people shape the way they perceive politics and participate in politics. So it's really important to address those from the get-go. We also realize that young people from the urban areas are more likely to participate in all forms of political action than young people from rural areas. And also, interestingly, we see that young people who feel like their needs are addressed, so different type of needs, including socioeconomic needs and concerns, they're also more interested in politics. They're more interested in politics in general, but also more interested to participate in the political process. So it's really those two things in a way cannot be even dissociated, it means. And it's really kind of these findings, your study and our research shows really there is an urgency from politicians, political parties, governments in the region to address the socioeconomic needs of young people. And yeah, this is just one of the most important things as a policy recommendation that we could advise to do.
I think that's a very interesting thought, and also this perspective as seeing it also as an opportunity for engagement is really striking and very interesting. I want to also ask you a follow-up question. What do you see as societal consequences if this remains unaddressed?
Yeah, so this is like a very important question. And you know what is quite interesting is if you look at, let's say, how politicians run political campaigns in times of elections or so on, we see that very little attention is paid to young people. And there are many reasons for this, right? Oftentimes, especially, let's say, in Central Eastern Europe, politicians would run by offering benefits and some advantages to, let's say, pensioners, older citizens. One of the main reasons for this is also the demographic composition of the continent, right? Like Europe is an aging continent. Many of these countries are aging societies. So sometimes politicians perhaps think that they cannot win elections with the support of young people and try to ignore them. But ignoring them would have many, many consequences, negative consequences for society, and for a few reasons. And one of the most important one is that, you know, young people, when they're at the formative age, we know from different research that they form their political views usually at this adolescence age and their early adulthood, and they might remain with those political views and their attitudes towards democracy, towards political participation later on in life. We also know from different research that young people are not important as a demographic, only as a demographic group, but they're often also trendsetters. So they're usually the first adopters of certain societal political trends that might have a spillover effect to the older population. So they're a very important group to be engaged with. And, you know, we've seen in different parts of Europe that sometimes they are the first one to vote, let's say, for extreme parties. And then the same thing happens with the older generation. So they're a very important group, although sometimes small in comparison to the rest of the population. They're a very important group, and not finding ways to engage them would have many different negative consequences for society.
Thank you very much. I think this really, really important points that you are highlighting here. Robert, over to you. The IDM study highlights affordable housing, precarious employment, and educational mismatches as barriers to young people's mobility and participation. So we've talked about this just here before, socioeconomic barriers and social barriers. Similar what we saw in Elena's research results. From your perspective, how can EU macro-regional strategies such as the EUSDR help tackle these challenges and create more opportunities for youth engagement?
Thank you. I think what Elena said is extremely important, and this is something that we also see in the Danube strategy. And I think looking at the young people that we have engaged in the Danube region strategy are extremely interested in politics, in policy making, in really looking at the issues that we are all dealing with, and looking at this from a macro-regional perspective is something that also we've seen is something new. This is not just new for the young generation. This is also a kind of a new concept, how you actually look at cohesion policy, how you look at the development of the region, especially in Central Southeastern Europe. So what we've seen when we started with the Danube Youth Council was this extreme interest for something new, and we also see this will for really having an impact and to be able to discuss policies, to be able also to have this voice, my own voice raised and also heard. The macro-regional strategies are basically run on a national and on thematic level. So basically you have national representatives of national governments that are the owners of the strategy. And then we have this regional implementation and thematic implementation. So we are looking at 12 different thematic areas. All of them are actually mentioned in that study. So what is really interesting to see is, and I'm sure that Caroline can rely to this, is that when you involve the young people and really ask for their perspective, it helps actually on both sides. We have senior experts by coming from governments, coming from institutions, when we look at transport, when we look at, for example, education, when we look at brain drain. This is something where also senior experts get a lot of input from young generation, from the Danube Youth Council members. So this is something that is really something tangible, that is something really on the ground, where you can actually listen to young people, what they actually think. And what was really an eye-opener for quite many of the senior, let's say senior level on the macro-regional level, was really to have this articulated need and articulated wishes from the young generation when we started 3 years ago. And after 3 years we are now entering the third generation of Danube Youth Council. The council itself is being a part of the governance structure. So really the young people are part of this of the structure. They are also part of the implementation of the macro-regional strategies, which also shows the real engagement actually on both sides. We have seen this also from basically both perspectives. The seniors and the representatives of the governments, of the institutions, basically said that it's extremely important for them also to have a kind of reality check to see, is this what we are doing? Is this something that you can refer to? Is this something that we need to continue? Shall we adapt? And this is a kind of a flowing process that we have been now for several years on. The question then is how to really continue in this, because again, macro-regional strategies are quite a young concept. I mean, the oldest macro-regional strategy has been here since 2008. That's the Baltic Seas region strategy. So this is something really, really new. And if you look at, for example, when you also look at Eurobarometer, there are young people and young generation, or the citizens from European Union, have a much closer relation, for example, to Interreg when it comes to implementation of projects. But Interreg has been here since 35 years. So of course the awareness of the citizens is much higher, and this is something also where macro-regional strategies need to work on this as well. And this is why we have also the Danube Youth Council is also a kind of ambassador role also for the young generation, for their countries and for their regions, really to come in, to explain, and also provide this possibility for engagement. Again, we have not only the Danube Youth Council, we also had a look at how we can actually engage and involve even a wider audience. And since the second year now, we have what we call the Danube Youth Organizations Network. So there we have almost 50 organizations from all across the Danube region, where organizations that are working with young people from a very, very different areas are also part of this of the Danube region strategy, and they are also a second, let's say, another layer of disseminating, another layer of providing a direct input to macro-regional implementation and macro-regional cooperation. And by that, we also hope very much really to have a even further outreach to a very different perspective, to very different projects, very different approaches. And this is something that we will also continue working on in the future.
Thank you very much. I think you did already answer some of the question I meant to ask you right after this, but maybe I can ask you something else and rephrase the question a little bit. When I look at youth engagement, we hear a lot about meaningful youth engagement, because sometimes it feels like youth engagement is more seen as a consultation process, and not as it's not real agenda setting power, not real decision power for young people. Maybe you can share your thoughts on this idea of how you can actually give young people decision-making powers instead of just consulting them.
Well, this is something that we have been, and I see Caroline smiling. This is something that we have been discussing, and not only in the Danube strategy, but also in other macro-regional strategies. And clearly, coming from the background that this is also something new, and that especially this macro-regional cooperation is owned by the states, and we have a clear structures here. But what we have seen right from the beginning is that, of course, we start with consultations, so really to have this youth input when it comes to the implementation of macro-regional policies. But we have also, throughout the course of the last 3 years, we have also generated a lot of possibilities how young people can actually be the decision makers in certain fields. Of course, the Danube Youth Council is not a country. It's not something that is deciding in these kind of terms, but the Danube Youth Council can actually decide on many things. Give you just a few examples. We have the implementation of the Danube region strategy is, as I said before, it happens on thematic levels. So, for example, when we look at the problem of disaster management in the region, there is one priority area that's dealing with disaster management, with cross-border cooperation, how countries can actually help each other, develop strategies together, how states and institutions can work on this. The Danube Youth Councils, the representatives, are actually part of this group. So they are not just there to listen, but they are also there when it comes to the meetings, when it comes to the conferences, when it comes to actually together developing the strategies here. They are in these expert meetings throughout the whole year, and they are actually discussing and working with all those experts from ideally 14 countries, and they are part of this decision-making process. the Danube Youth Council and the colleagues from the council also have the possibility. Once a year we have this huge conference that we just had last week in Sarajevo, the annual conference, where basically under the presidency, so each country, each year we have one country that's taking over the presidency. There, the young people also have possibility to shape the agenda here. So they are actually able to choose their own topics. They are actually able to invite experts to talk, to present what they would like to do. So this is something also very, very concrete when you reach out the stakeholders. We had just last year 450 participants in Sarajevo from all across the Danube region, where also the Danube Youth Council had their own dedicated session. There was also a cross MRS session where representatives from all 4 macro-regional strategies were there. So I think, again, it's a process. This is not something that happens just from today for tomorrow, but this is something that we have seen real progress, also comparing where we started with this youth implementation and engagement. And these days, the young people are accepted as equal partners when it comes to the implementation of the Danube strategy. So again, I mentioned this also before. On one hand, we have this Danube Youth Council, but on the other hand, the Danube Youth Organizations Network. This is something that is right at the beginning, and it's something that is actually forming, which is also pretty open at the moment. And is also looking for inputs. So also maybe this is a call out to anyone listening to us who would like to get engaged. If you are an organization that is dealing with young people, with youth policies, with youth projects, you can actually join the Danube Youth Organizations Network. They are open. We have, as I said before, 50 organizations here. This is something where you can also come up with ideas, you can generate projects, you can also look at policies that these organizations would like to focus on. And the cooperation between the Danube Youth Council and the Danube Youth Organizations Network is also something that is extremely important to have a wider reach out all across the region. Again, the Danube Youth Council, Carolina and colleagues are directly part of the governance, so they are part of the governance structure of the region, and the Youth Organizations Network would be the second possibility how to get engaged.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to take a little step back and I want to ask you, Elena, you mentioned earlier that in your research you saw many young men in the region showing trust to authoritarian figures and skepticism towards democracy, with political engagement often directed towards right-wing or authoritarian movements. What are your thoughts on this combination of trust and skepticism?
Yeah, so when it comes to young people and democracy, it's quite an interesting and lengthy debate, so to say, because there is no consensus, at least in the literature. There's always a question like, have young people become less democratic or more democratic? Where is the evidence? And in our own research in Southeast Europe, we see that young people in general, but particularly young men, there is a slight decrease in the support for democracy as a form of government. But there are also quite a few contradictions. For example, half of young people in Southeast Europe who strongly support democracy also show a readiness to endorse a strong leader. We also see that 1/3 of respondents, or a little bit more than 1/3, would trade off democracy for better socioeconomic living conditions. So sometimes, looking at this data, we often wonder, is it really that support for democracy is declining in the region, or young people are unsure whether democracies can deliver? And this goes back to the socioeconomic concerns that we mentioned in the beginning. So sometimes how we interpret the data is that, this demand for strong leader and so on is also the strongest in the countries in which young people are the most concerned about existential and socioeconomic issues. So there is something there. It really shows that maybe there is an increased questioning whether democracies can simply deliver on the socioeconomic and other needs that young people have. So it's really imperative in order to strengthen the young people's belief in democracy in the first place, to work on providing them with this more basic needs and really addressing the issues, the existential issues that they're facing, such as unemployment, poverty, and all those issues that also make a high proportion of young people in the region to leave their countries as well. And you mentioned young men here, but yeah, this is also interesting that we see in our data lots of gender disparities all over. So we see that young men are in general more ethno-nationalistic, more prone to have right-wing tendencies. They also have higher self-reported knowledge in politics, and they're also more interested in politics. And it seems that they're more easily swayed on the right-wing spectrum of politics. So it really shows this complexity. On the one side, we have socioeconomic concerns. On the other side, we have these gender gaps that need to be addressed in order to have a healthier democratic societies in the region.
Thank you very much. I think it's very interesting to see that there's just not just one causality, and that there's that it's quite a complex issue. So thank you for sharing on that, and it's also very interesting to get insights on your research. Caroline, I want to ask you, the IDM findings highlighted the digital space as both a risk and an opportunity for youth engagement. In your own experience with the Danube Youth Council, how do you see the digital sphere shaping political participation, and what opportunities has the digital space created for your work?
I think the digital sphere plays a crucial role in how young people engage today. So they gather the information through digital spaces. They use opportunities of informal learning. They have spaces where they connect, where they can also mobilize and share issues and discuss those issues. And I think it's a very, very crucial space for them to connect also transnationally, and to share opinions, to share experiences, and so on. At the same time, as you said, there are some threats to it when it comes to disinformation, and I think it also very much influences the political opinion of young people, as there is a lot of misinformation out there, and there we really have to focus on systems or on initiatives on how to better inform people and to make really informed decisions about opinions, about the information that you can find out there in order to do research, in order to find the sources, and also to make an informed decision about the places or the spaces you find yourself in. At the same time, I also find that the digital environment is not the only place for young people. So they really have also the need to connect in real lives, and you can feel that even more, that they really enjoy engaging in real spaces and to come together and not only connect via Zoom as we do today, but really find joint spaces. And it was also a really nice opportunity last week at the annual forum for us as a Danube Youth Council to come together as persons and to discuss and to have joint forces, as it is easier to engage and to present shows another kind of strength and awareness and visibility towards the spaces that we move around. So I think young people, they really seek genuine relationships and connections and community engagement. So we have to find a way to connect those both places, which we, since COVID, we have to do, and we do very much so. And I think we can embrace it more.
Thank you very much. I absolutely agree with you. I think it's a often underestimated point. Talking about visibility, Robert, I want to ask you, visibility is key for young people to engage with and benefit from macro-regional strategies. The IDM study found that the visibility of MRS is generally low among youth. What are your thoughts on this? Why is this, and how could youth help make these strategies even more relevant and visible?
Well, I just had a look before on the Eurobarometer study, where we also have the results and a little bit of a data about the awareness of about macro-regional strategies. The highest, and it's not very high though, is in the Baltic Sea region. That is 14%. This is not focusing on youth. This is focusing on the citizens. 14% in the Baltic Sea strategy. In the Baltic Sea region, we are 9% in the Danube region, 9% in the Alpine region, and 7% in the Adriatic and Ionian space. So, as you said, William, the awareness is not very high, and there are several reasons for that. This macro-regional cooperation, as I said before, is something that is pretty new. This is something that is a kind of a new concept of how to work with each other, how to work on a regional level. And B, it's also in terms also not very touchy, because when you talk about policies, if you talk about transnational cooperation, regional cooperation, this is not only for young people something that is very abstract. The challenge that we have across the region is really how to translate this very, very, let's say, very policy work, how we translate this in terms that actually citizens understand this. And this is the real challenge, the connection between the policy work, between this cooperation work, and what it actually means on the ground. So what kind of projects are macro-regional strategies and macro-regional cooperation actually enabling? And this is something that macro-regional strategies have been tackling. So there is large projects that would not be able to be implemented without this policy alignment across the region. So when we are looking at different processes, for example, we have this very famous example of Danube sturgeons, which is the fish that is coming from the Black Sea all the way to the Black Forest. And due to the many barriers along the Danube, we need to the fish was not able to go back, lay its egg, and go back to the Black Sea. And there was a big project set, but before the project could be implemented, this kind of help for the fish to swim across, many countries needed to align their policies. So there was a lot of policy work necessary in the background that most of the citizens in the region would not really be interested. But then when you go and see that the Danube sturgeon is basically back in the Danube, this is something that is very concrete and that you can imagine and that you can also see. So this translation between policy cooperation and project implementation is something that macro-regional strategies have been working on for many years. And again, if I say EU macro-regional strategy, this is something very, very difficult to explain. So again, this link is something very important. What we have also seen, and I also had a look at Eurobarometer in the Danube region. So the awareness of the citizens, the highest, I'm just going through the numbers now, the highest 32% is in Hungary, followed by 29% Slovakia, Croatia 25%, Austria 24%, Bulgaria 21%. So we also have different levels because overall we have 9% in the Danube. So you have countries, of course, where Danube is something that we actually identify ourselves with. So of course there is the identification factor is something also extremely important. And what we also see is that when a country in the Danube region takes this presidency, so takes over the lead, like we have, in EU Council presidency, there is a year that is basically full of communication. So also this kind of communication, events, engagement of experts, engagement of civil society, engagement of young people is something that you can really see also in the years to come. All those countries that I have actually mentioned have had already a presidency. So that means that also communication is something extremely important, really, to go out, not to speak about policy cooperation, but rather to speak about what can be achieved, what are the projects, and how can we actually work together, and how can we implement things that on both sides or on all sides of the borders are pretty much the same. We also say in the macro-regional cooperation that we are not divided by the problems that we have, but we are rather connected by the same problems that we have. So also from this kind of notion, learning from each other, because very different countries have very different solutions here. And this mutual learning is so extremely important, really, to see how country A is dealing with this, how country B is dealing with this, and what can we actually learn from each other? How can we connect? How can we do this this together? And third thing is also extremely important is the whole process of EU enlargement. And we also see in the Danube strategy, we have 5 accession countries, the Western Balkan countries, plus Ukraine and Moldova. And this is also an extremely important factor also for the young generation. And we also see this huge positive energy from especially the young people from the accession countries, really to be able to have their voice in this political and policy process, where it also gives them the opportunity to articulate their needs, and also to say what we actually want, what we expect once our country becomes member of the European Union. What are the concerns, how can we also reach out to our peers that are already members of the European Union? So how can we again learn from each other? How can we support each other? So the third point would be also, again, the enlargement process that is extremely important in our region.
Thank you. I think this adds interesting perspectives. Elena, I want to ask you another question on your research. When I read it, you described that you, for me personally, found this very interesting group, young people who combine traditional values with inclusive social attitudes. I think it was the third segment you found, or you described, who are rather cautiously engaged in democracy, but you see an opportunity for political engagement and also potentially for policymakers to engage this segment. What were your thoughts when you were conducting the study, or when you looked into this group, and why do you believe they offer an opportunity for political engagement?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, when we did this study, which is based on 6 different clusters of young people, so really the idea was, because in the general study, when we do it with more descriptive statistics and kind of comparative analysis, we look at young people mostly, although we group them sometimes as different groups, but mostly, we talk about it as one entity. And really the idea here was to highlight that there are many different types and segments and groups of young people. And what is fascinating is to see that sometimes their similarities are larger, let's say in some cases across countries than within country. What I mean about that is, when you have, let's say, a young person that comes from a family with good financial situation, from an urban center, and had certain opportunities in terms of education, etc. This person is much more similar to somebody who has their profile and comes from a different country than a person that comes maybe from a rural area and has way more financial hardship and has parents with lower education and they struggle with education themselves. So it really highlights nuances between different segments and groups. And here you're right to point out that some of these groups, let's say the segment 3, which we called ambitious but anxious strivers, they have some contradictory features in a sense that, on the one side, they're more traditional driven, they're skeptical towards democracy, but on the other side, they're open towards, they think that women, ethnic minorities, and LGBTQI group have not enough rights. So they're open to extending the rights of these groups. And but really their primary concerns are usually, again, socioeconomic. And there is something again here thinking that maybe if you address those, you can increase their trust in democracy in general and in the political process, and sort of by offering them concrete policy solutions, you have an opportunity to engage them more in politics. And while we talk about young people, especially in this region, as pretty disengaged, we sometimes also are faced with very much surprising outcomes. So, you know, we didn't even see this in our Serbian study, let's say, and yet young students in Serbia are already for more than a year protesting on the streets. So sometimes, you know, it's surprising how this engagement happens and when there is some critical juncture that sparks it. So I think despite sometimes these negative attitudes towards democracy and participation, there are lots of opportunities for engagement. And here it was really useful to hear in the beginning Malvina's recommendation for engagement, and then Robert's and Caroline pointing out some really practical examples from their experience and their work on how to engage young people in the political process. And I just wanted to mention one last thing, that what Robert was saying about the EU enlargement. What is quite striking when we do this research is that, you know, the young people who come from the non-EU countries are more optimistic about the EU and more optimistic somehow in general than those that are already part of the EU. So if there is really some kind of energy and momentum around this enlargement, that I think it can be used for good, for more engagement and for more really hearing their ideas and how those ideas can be translated into specific policy work.
Thank you very much. Moving on to a question for Carolina, focusing on opportunity. I want to ask you if you could propose concrete action, whether it's local, regional, or at the EU level, to strengthen youth participation and visibility in shaping the future of the Danube region. What would it be and why?
Thank you for this question, William. I think we already mentioned a lot of good examples. The Danube Youth Councils or the other youth councils on the macro regional strategies, or the national youth councils. You find a lot of youth councils in very different formats, and they are actually the basis in order to get youths involved. I think what is important to really engage more people with different backgrounds when it comes to socioeconomic issues, when it comes to diversity, when it comes to the LGBTIQ people with disabilities. I think there is still there needs to be more opportunities to engage with people which show different kind of diversity aspects that we sometimes miss in very many aspects, as we don't think of them in this way. And there's a lot of opportunities to give them a voice and to really engage them, and to in order to make, if we make the work more visible on a very basic level, and then strengthen it from bottom up, but also top down, as we do it in the Danube region, where the senior level and the junior level comes together, and they really had to make steps from both sides in order to understand and to communicate better. I think this is the way in order to give more opportunities to the youth. But as a very practical example, I think we really have to go into the communities. We really have to make small initiatives. You know, they can start really, really small, very grassroots initiatives, and engage people in developing ideas, project ideas from the very beginning, you know, from the project design, but also engage them when it comes to formulating the guidelines for an application, for example. Those are very practical steps that you can take, and very easy to implement, actually, in order for them to be engaged and for their perspectives to be added on different levels. You know, you can do it on a policy level, but also on a very practical level. And I think this is also very much appreciated by a lot of young people.
Thank you. I want to remind the audience that we will move after the closing question into the Q&A. So if you haven't done it already, please type in a question in the Zoom chat and address it to a panelist. Then I can delegate it to our panelists, and they are happy to answer. To close the round of questions, I, again, as in the beginning, want to ask all of you, the IDM study concludes that youth are not just recipients, but agents of change. And I think this is a nice summary also of what we've discussed here and the perspectives you shared. With the request for a brief reply, where do you see the most potential for young people to engage? Maybe, I know we talked about this already, but maybe in some short thoughts on this. And whoever wants to start first, just go. Yes.
Very practically, youth should get engaged, in the village they come from, in the youth club that is in their region, in the music orchestra in the next village, in board games, clubs, whatever there is out there, or just engaging with the villagers that you live with, whether it be young people or also older generations. We also can really strengthen the intergenerational activities and really connect through generations, as this will become more important also when it comes to engagement and learning from experience and exchanging. And those are just small steps, but actually can drive and give you the support in order to also get engaged in the Danube Youth Council, in other macro-regional councils, or on EU level, but also on national level. Those are really very small steps that you can actually take in order to have also the joint forces behind you that strengthen your participation and engagement, as this is very much needed for young people.
Maybe I continue with where basically Carolina left off. I think this multi-level engagement is something that we see extremely important. So look at and this is also the basic notion of this macro-regional cooperation, is really to look at this, top-down and bottom-up approaches from both sides, really to be on the ground, to be in the regions, to be in the cities, to be in the communities. Bring this cooperation idea really down and translate it into very, very concrete, be it projects, be it cooperation initiatives. So really make the young voices heard. So give the young people the opportunity to develop their own ideas and translate them into very practical outcomes. We have, when I just look at the Danube Youth Council, or also the Youth Organizations Network, we have a huge diversity of young people with different backgrounds, with different professional experience. We have many of them are young professionals, and I think this is huge potential here, and every single of them is basically a ambassador of this macro-regional cooperation, of this transnational cooperation. At the end of the day, European cooperation. It is at the end of the day, it's about European cooperation. It's about really reaching out to my generation, but not only to my generation, but also to the elder generation, also leading by example. So how did we do this? So how did we make it possible to work on this or that topic? And again, this is the way how this, abstract cooperation can become really, really concrete, because everyone can actually imagine something concrete in this. So I think this is the really way to go. The connection between the transnational, European level, national level, and regional level. And this is, I think, where the key actually lies, really to have all three levels in Europe connected. And this is also where the strength of young generation is, especially having extremely good communication abilities. This is something that also the older generation can learn. This is also what we hear from senior experts, that they say, they can actually communicate much better than we can do this, because they are the digital natives. They are the people that communication is something really natural to them. And what we also hear from representatives of the young generation is that we are junior experts, but we want to learn from the experience of the senior experts. So again, this engagement between, let's say, both junior and senior levels is something extremely important. And I think for the transnational cooperation, this is something, this is the way to go for the future.
Yeah, and I will end then this question here on how to mobilize young people. So I can only echo what Robert and Caroline already said. I think this multi-level engagement is really, really important. And it's also something that, you know, we often talk about, like, especially now thinking about our own research, it's often quite negative in a sense that, you know, we say, okay, young people are disengaged. How do we engage them? Do they believe less in democracy and all those areas? But where I have hope is that they are very hopeful at the same time. And it really, you know, shows some positivity, and this can be mobilized, this can be used. And another thing I would say is that, like, really representation works for young people. They want to see politicians that look like them, they have similar experiences. So I think in order to mobilize more young people, there should be also more young people involved in the first place. And then there is a little bit like a butterfly effect, it's gonna multiply. So I think it works in this way. So I'm hopeful that this can be done. And also, you know, another thing that is often mentioned as negative is the digital culture and how social media have a negative aspect sometimes on young people. But we also see lately quite a few examples where mobilization happens online, and also young people learn like different strategies from different countries and get inspired. So this is also something that can be used to, you know, on their home turf as digital natives, to use this even more for kind of mobilization and engagement strategies.
Thank you very much. We will then move into the Q&A, and I will read out a question. I do not see who it is addressed to, so maybe whoever wants to add on it and feels like talking about it can say something about it. So the question is, how can we explain that young people in the EU are less enthusiastic about European Union than those in the candidate countries?
Maybe I can start because I mentioned that. I think it's, you know, maybe young people realize that, okay, once countries join the EU, still countries need to work on their democratic processes, on the rule of law. It's not just, you know, the fact that they entered the EU doesn't mean that all problems stopped. And of course, you know, being a candidate country gives some kind of idea of the future for young people, something to look forward to. So there is still this hope. And this is especially true because we did this research in also the Western Balkan 6 countries that have had very long and exhausting kind of process with the EU enlargement that is still no end in sight. So also, you know, this tiredness and this kind of, okay, we are really hopeful that this may be gonna bring some change finally. So I think we could read the results, something like that.
If I may add on this, and this is something, I think this is not just something that concerns the young generation. I think this is the overall notion that you actually get, especially for the accession countries, also from the political perspective. So you have many politicians coming from accession countries that are extremely positive about the achievements of the European Union. So we have a lot of international fora where you have prime ministers or ministers discussing with ministers from EU member states, and you can see actually the positivity from the Western Balkan countries or accession countries, where the positivity is much higher than actually those of the member states. And to put it in a very concrete words, there was a politician from one Western Balkan country that said, guys, you have achieved huge things. The European Union is such a cool project. You should be more proud of this, and you should be more aware of what we have done, and that also these countries want to be part of this club. So again, I think this is something that is extremely important. This positive approach, and of course, the question will be that hopefully there will be a soon end to this negotiation discussion, and that the Western Balkan countries, Ukraine, Moldova, again, that the EU enlargement gets a new drive, a new momentum, especially looking at the geopolitical troubles that we are basically in. So we see this a lot of positive pressure, you could also say. Also, we see this in the development of macro-regional strategies, where actually the strategies are positioning themselves as tools for enlargement, because in the macro-regional cooperation, there is no difference between EU member states and non-member state. So this is an equal cooperation. So it doesn't matter if you come from accession country or you come from EU country. Decision-making, cooperation, work is on the same principles. So here, this is also something that is extremely positive, where you also see this mutual learning, how you can already, and I think the correct expression is this gradual integration of accession countries, really to be part of this process, work with countries on the same eye level, same eye principle, and this also translates into the cooperation of the young generation. Same approach and also very, very similar results.
Thank you. I will bring in one more question from the audience, and afterwards we'll slowly wrap up. So again, no person that it's addressed to, so feel free to comment and to answer if you have something to say. The question is, what prevents young people from getting involved in local politics? Is it generally easier for them to engage at the national or at the local level? Yeah, who wants to say something about that?
I can start. Well, from the experiences with the Danube Youth Council, it really differs, the experience that you bring with and the expertise that you gather through the education that you follow, and on the topics that you want to bring in. So as far as I can say, it's really up to the level and to the people that you involve with. But I don't see that there is any less involvement in local politics than it is on a higher level or an EU level or a macro regional level. But rather it depends on the topics that you can bring in and that you discuss and that you get involved with. And I see that there's the opportunity to also engage young people and to connect the young people on those different levels, working and exchanging, and to get inspiration on what initiatives you can take from one another.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wants to say something?
Well, I don't think that matters that much if you look at regional or national level. I mean, I think the most important thing is really to have young people being interested in the political discourse. So really to be part of this, and I think Elena, you said it several times, to be engaged in this political process. This is much more important than really to look at is it regional level, is it national level, is it local level, to have open minds for young people, to give them the opportunity so that they know that they can actually engage, that they actually are interested in political processes. And again, looking at this, we discussed before the question of democratic processes and populism and fake news and that kind of stuff. So the more you actually engage, the more you connect with each other. Again, coming from this, coming to the transnational cooperation, so cooperation across borders, also gives you a different perspective. So you see also that there is also in different countries young people that have the same interest, that have maybe same problems, same views here. So I think it's much more important to be involved, to have this interest for political processes, and then I think also, because we're going to a little bit towards the end of the discussion, I think also for the future, this is something really to look at the involvement on political levels across borders.
Thank you very much. unless anyone wants to add something, I think I will wrap up our session, our discussion. I am very grateful that you all joined, that I want to thank our panelists especially. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Elena. I think, and of course, thank you, Malwina, for the excellent study presentation. I think this was a very, very thought-provoking, very insightful conversation and discussion we had. I think we are all aware that it's a very crucial topic and that it should be addressed even more sooner than later. I think the discussion and the last things you said wrapped up really well what we talked about today. I think that we were able to look at different perspectives that show that youth participation is really essential and very important for more connected European regions and the European community itself, and that socioeconomic concerns dominate. That's really what stands out for me. We need to tackle these socioeconomic concerns in order to understand young people's concerns and actually do something about them. Yes, and if that is done, policies will be more effective and inclusive because they will include young people's problems and young people's visions. So yeah, I want to end on maybe my final other takeaway. I think it's about making sure to open doors for young people and always keep doing so, because there's always young people coming after us. You can find the IDM study, How Would Young People Strengthen Europe's Regions, on the IDM website. I also, I can only, look into Elena's study. It's very, very interesting. And yes, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the audience for being here. Have a wonderful evening. And thank you for being part in this discussion.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good evening.